I never thought betrayal could feel so silent. Not loud, not screaming, not explosive, but quiet like a door closing softly in your face and leaving you outside in the cold. My name is Samantha. I am 33 years old, a woman who has worked hard to build a life in digital marketing, a career that many in my family still dismiss as just playing with computers. What they don't know is how successful I have become. I own properties, I've built financial independence, I've carved out my place in this world. But none of it ever mattered to the people whose approval I craved most, my family. For as long as I can remember, I've been the one left out. The sibling who never got the invitation until it was too late, the daughter whose birthday was skipped with only a two-word text. The one who never seemed to belong, though I kept convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, it was all a misunderstanding. That maybe my family still cared for me even if they didn't know how to show it. Last year, when my birthday passed without even a phone call, just a bland text from my mother. Happy birthday, Samantha, without even an emoji. Something cracked inside me. But still I held on. Still I told myself it wasn't personal. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they were busy. Maybe if I just stayed useful, stayed kind one day, they'd notice me again. And then came the invitation. It was thick, gold-lettered cardstock weighty in my hands. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Thomas Anderson and Lucy Gale. My brother's wedding. My only brother. My heart leapt, tears pricking my eyes as I read the words over and over. May 15th. A garden ceremony in the city. A lakeside reception to follow. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seen again. This was it, I thought. The moment I had waited for all my life. The chance to stand beside my family, to belong again. I spent weeks preparing. I chose a breathtaking dress, found the perfect gift, booked my hair appointment. I got my nails done, something I rarely indulged in. Each preparation was an act of hope, of love, of belief that this time would be different. I told myself this was the sign. The ice between me and my family would thaw. The long winters of being excluded, ignored, dismissed, they were ending. I would finally step into spring. The day before the wedding, I stopped by my Aunt Hillary's house. She was the only one who had ever truly been on my side, the only one who called, who asked the questions no one else asked. Don't you feel lonely, Samantha? She was the only one who seemed proud when I left home and made my own career. The only one who told me she admired my strength. I arrived at her house beaming, excited, clutching the surprise gift I had chosen for my brother. I hugged her and said with shining eyes, I can't wait for tomorrow. But instead of joy, I saw something flicker across her face, sadness, guilt. Her voice was tight when she asked if I wanted coffee. While she was in the kitchen, I noticed a photo album on the coffee table. Curious, I opened it, and there it was. My entire family smiling in a beautiful garden. Thomas in a sharp suit, Lucy in her gown. Guests in their finest champagne glasses raised. Photos of vows, of speeches, of dancing, of group shots with relatives I hadn't seen in years. The album was their wedding. I froze, staring at the pages, my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth dry. Aunt Hillary, what is this? Her hands trembled as she set down the coffee tray. Her eyes filled with sorrow as she whispered, Thomas's wedding. Last weekend. The words slammed into me like a car crash. My body went numb. The wedding, I choked out. She sat beside me, gripping my hand. They gave you the wrong date, Samantha. On purpose. I tried to stop them. I told them it was cruel. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. My heart shattered. My invitation hadn't been a mistake. It had been a lie, a trick, a deliberate cruelty. I stood dizzy, my vision blurring. But I got the invitation. I've been preparing. My voice broke. Her eyes flared with anger. They excluded you intentionally. I almost didn't go because of it. But I didn't know how to protect you from this. The album slipped from my hands. I saw their smiling faces again, their joy, their celebration, all while I sat at home counting down to a day that would never come. Something inside me hardened. A trembling resolve began to take shape. I told her I need to confirm this. She clutched my hand. Wait. Samantha, you shouldn't go alone. This was cruel. You've always been strong, but you don't have to face them without someone. I shook my head. This is something I have to do myself. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Then whatever happens, remember, I am always on your side. I always have been. I always will be. Her words wrapped around me like a shield as I drove away. My heart was a storm, anger, grief, confusion, betrayal, all colliding until I could barely breathe. I reached my parents' cottage. Thomas's car was parked in the driveway. My hands trembled as I opened the door. Inside, laughter. My parents, Thomas and Lucy, were gathered in the living room, flipping through more wedding photos. Their joy filled the space until I stepped into the doorway. Then it froze. Every head turned. Samantha. My mother's face paled. What are you doing here? I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. I went to Aunt Hillary's. She told me the wedding was last weekend. The air grew heavy. Thomas and Lucy exchanged a quick glance, her lips pressed into a thin, guilty line. My mother avoided my eyes. It was a small ceremony, she muttered. Small, I remembered this album. Dozens of guests, fairy lights, champagne. Then Thomas spoke, his voice steady, almost cold. We never intended to invite you. His words sliced through me. He looked me dead in the eye and said, we didn't want you ruining our wedding. You're always quiet, always in the background, but somehow things go wrong when you're around. I wanted one perfect day in my life, and that meant without you. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. You've felt this way. For a long time, I whispered. All of us have, my mother said softly, her tone detached, her words like ice. Something in me broke then, not just from missing the wedding, but from the crushing realization that I had never been wanted at all. The silence in the room stretched long, suffocating. My father tried to intervene weakly, muttering about keeping the wedding small, but my mother's voice drowned him out. Cold, final. You're disrupting the peace we've built in this family. Thomas leaned back, shaking his head. This is exactly why we didn't invite you. Take the hint. We don't want you. Time stopped. I felt myself detach as if I were floating above the room, watching a scene play out that I already knew, deep down, was true. My voice came out barely above a whisper. I see. I turned, walked out, and closed the door behind me. In the quiet of the night, I dialed Aunt Hillary. My voice cracked as I said, thank you for always being in my corner. Her reply was soft, steady, the only lifeline I had left. You are my family, Samantha. Family isn't about blood. It's built on love and respect. Her words echoed through me, giving me strength I didn't know I still had. Driving away, hot tears streamed down my face, but underneath them was something else, a growing determination. Their cruelty had ripped away the last thread of illusion, and now I was free to decide what came next. The drive home after leaving my parents' cottage was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, yet they still trembled. The road stretched ahead in hazy streaks of light and shadow, but all I could hear was my brother's voice replaying over and over. Take the hint. We don't want you. The words were like shards of glass embedded in my chest, each repetition cutting deeper. I had always suspected. The long silences, the forgotten invitations, the hollow excuses, I had carried them like invisible bruises. But still, I hoped. Still, I longed for that one moment when I would finally be embraced, finally be seen. And now, stripped of every pretense, the truth stood before me, naked and merciless. I was never wanted. Not at birthdays, not at holidays, not even on the day that was supposed to be the most joyous celebration of my brother's life. My vision blurred with tears as I pulled into my apartment building's garage. I sat in the car long after the engine went silent, my body shaking with the effort of holding myself together. I wasn't crying because I missed a wedding. I was crying because I finally understood with brutal clarity that there was no place for me in their world. I dragged myself upstairs, collapsed onto my couch, and stared at the ceiling in silence. Hours passed, but I didn't move. My phone buzzed once, Aunt Hillary checking in. I didn't have the strength to answer, but just seeing her name on the screen steadied me. She was the only one who had ever stood beside me. Without her, I might have drowned in the loneliness years ago. That night, lying in bed, I whispered to the darkness, no more. No more begging for scraps of love. No more proving myself to people who will never see me. No more hope. My chest ached as I said it, but at the same time, a strange calm settled over me. The illusion was shattered, and in its place, a new clarity began to form. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes but a fire smoldering inside. Revenge wasn't the word for it, not exactly. I didn't want to hurt them for sport, but I wanted to reclaim myself, to sever every chain they had ever wrapped around me. And if in the process they finally felt the consequences of their cruelty, then so be it. I sat at my desk with a notebook, writing down everything I had endured: the ignored birthdays, the exclusion from gatherings, the dismissive comments about my career, the countless ways they had erased me. As I wrote, the list grew longer, each memory a scar I had carried in silence. By the time I set the pen down, the page was full, and so was my resolve. The truth was, they had no idea who I really was. They saw me as the quiet ghost at the edge of family photos, the awkward sister, the daughter who never quite fit. What they didn't know was that while they dismissed me, I had built a life of strength and independence. They didn't know about my properties, the investments I had made, the financial stability I had secured. They didn't know that the house they lived in, the cottage they treated as their retirement sanctuary, was legally mine. Years ago, when my parents had fallen behind on payments, I had quietly stepped in. Through my LLC, I purchased my mother's share, consolidating ownership in my name. I never told them because I didn't need recognition. I only wanted to help. I thought keeping them safe was worth the silence. I thought that by supporting them in secret, I was proving my love even if they never showed me theirs. But now that silence was over, I picked up the phone and called Susan, my attorney. She was sharp, fearless, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at confrontation. When I told her what happened, she didn't try to soothe me with false comfort. She listened, took notes, and said firmly, "They've been emotionally abusing you for years. And now, despite being financially dependent on you, they've treated you as disposable. You don't need to accept this anymore. We can protect you." The word protect hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had been my own shield, patching myself together after every wound. Hearing someone else offer to stand beside me, it cracked something open in my chest. Within days, Susan and I began gathering evidence. Screenshots of group chats where my messages were ignored, records of holidays spent alone. The invitation itself, proof that I had been deliberately given the wrong date. Photos of the wedding I had been excluded from. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building, not just to defend myself, but to finally draw the line. Susan filed for a restraining order on my behalf, citing emotional abuse and harassment. When I signed the documents, my hands shook, not from fear, but from release. For the first time, I was no longer playing by their rules. I was setting my own. A month later, the court approved the order. Legal documents were served to every member of my family. They could no longer contact me directly online or in person. The silence that followed was deafening, but for once it was not lonely. It was peaceful. Then came the phone call I had been waiting for. My mother's voice, sharp with disbelief, rang through the line. "Samantha, what is this? We're your family." I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "Not anymore. You've made it clear for years that I wasn't part of this family. Now I'm just formalizing it." Her voice cracked. "This is ridiculous. We were just what I cut in. Pretending I didn't exist. Erasing me from every memory that mattered. That's how you treat family." There was silence on the other end. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "Is this about money? You're mad because we needed your help. I didn't even know you were paying for the repairs until I saw the notice." Her words froze me. Not because they surprised me, but because they revealed everything I had always feared. They had never really seen me, not even when I was the one holding them up. "That's exactly the problem," I said quietly. "You never understood." And then I hung up. The calls didn't stop after that. Thomas sent furious messages through lawyers threatening to sue, calling me crazy, blaming me for our parents' financial troubles. Each one only solidified my decision. They had used me for years, and now that the safety net was gone, they wanted to paint me as the villain. But I refused to carry their weight any longer. What I didn't expect was the letter that came from my father, delivered through my lawyer since direct contact was forbidden. His handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places. "Samantha," he wrote, I watched in silence as you were pushed out of the family. My cowardice led us here. If legal action is what it takes, maybe it's what we deserve. I just want you to know I'm sorry. If I had been a better father, this might not have happened. I read the letter over and over, my chest tightening. A flicker of pity sparked in me, but the wounds were still fresh, the betrayal still raw. Sorry didn't undo years of silence. Sorry didn't erase the night I stood in that living room hearing my brother tell me I wasn't wanted. Still, the letter sat on my desk for days, a quiet reminder that even in the ashes, there were fragments of regret. But regret couldn't rebuild what they had destroyed. This was only the beginning. The day Susan called me about the cottage, I felt my heart stop. Samantha. She said, her voice calm but edged with steel. Your parents' cottage, it's ready legally. The property is yours. You have the right to evict them. What would you like to do? For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. That cottage wasn't just a piece of land. It was the last thread connecting me to them, to the family I had spent my life chasing like a shadow. It had once belonged to my grandparents, a place filled with summers of laughter and the smell of pine and lake water. Then it passed to my parents. And years ago, when they fell behind on payments, I quietly stepped in. Through my LLC, I purchased my mother's share and secured the deed in my name. Legally, I owned it all. But no one knew. They had continued living there as if nothing had changed. They treated it like shared family property. Weekend barbecues, holidays, even whole summers. The place was theirs in their minds, their sanctuary, their retirement home. And I had let them believe it, thinking kindness was enough, thinking that silently supporting them would somehow bridge the chasm between us. But that illusion had been shattered the moment Thomas told me to take the hint. And now I was ready to sever the last tie. Send the eviction notice, I said without hesitation. The following Monday, I drove to the cottage with Michael, another attorney from Susan's firm, and a sheriff as a witness. My stomach twisted as the car crunched down the familiar gravel driveway. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, so achingly familiar that it almost broke me. But I straightened my shoulders. This wasn't nostalgia. This was justice. My father opened the door. He looked older than I remembered, his hair nearly white, his back stooped, his face worn with lines I hadn't seen before. For a moment, my chest ached with pity. "Samantha," he said weakly, "won't you come in?" "No," I replied softly but firmly. "Michael, please explain." Michael stepped forward, clearing his throat as he handed my father a sealed envelope. "Mr. Anderson, this is an official notice of eviction from this property. You have 30 days to vacate and return the keys." My father's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. His eyes darted across the words, and I watched as disbelief drained into horror. "But this is our home. This is—" I met his gaze, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "No. This is my property. I allowed you to use it before, but that permission has been revoked." Behind him, my mother appeared. Her face froze when she saw me standing there with Michael and the sheriff. "What's going on?" she demanded. "They're telling us to leave, Debbie," my father said, his voice trembling. Her eyes snapped to mine, wide with betrayal. "You're kicking us out of our home, our retirement home." "You've always known it was legally mine," I said, my tone quiet but unyielding. "And you've continued to take advantage of my kindness." Her voice cracked shrill with panic. "We have nowhere to go." "You can live with Thomas," I said coldly. "He made it very clear a few months ago that I wasn't family. Now he can take responsibility for his words." My father lowered his head, shame in his eyes. "He was wrong," he whispered. "We all were." "It's too late," I answered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue, but leaving me lighter as I spoke them. "In 30 days, if you're not prepared to move out, your belongings will be removed and the locks changed." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We're your parents. Why are you doing this?" I looked at her, at the woman who had dismissed me, ignored me, erased me, and I repeated the words that had branded themselves onto my soul, because as you said, I got the hint. As I turned to leave, my father grabbed my arm. His eyes were wet with tears, his grip trembling. "We're truly sorry, Samantha," he said, his voice breaking. "Can't you give us one more chance?" I gently pulled my arm away. "You had years. You had countless chances. And I'll say it again, it's too late." The air outside was crisp, and as I stepped away from the cottage, I felt something heavy lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't begging for a place. I wasn't bending myself into shapes to fit their idea of family. I was standing in my own power, and it was terrifying and exhilarating. 30 days later, they left quietly. The sheriff confirmed the move out, and the keys were returned. I walked through the empty cottage, the walls echoing with silence, where once there had been laughter arguments and the heavy weight of unspoken resentments. I touched the windowsills, ran my fingers along the worn banister, breathed in the faint smell of cedar. And then I let it go. I sold the cottage. It was more than property, it was a symbol of everything I had carried alone, of the invisible chains I had allowed to bind me. Selling it was like cutting those chains. I wasn't just reclaiming my house, I was reclaiming my life. 3 months after the eviction, I was in my office on a cool September afternoon when the receptionist buzzed my desk. "Samantha, there's someone here to see you." They said their name is Anderson. My chest tightened. The restraining order was still in place, but as long as they remained in the public lobby, they weren't technically violating it. I took a deep breath and walked downstairs. There they were, my parents. But not the confident, dismissive parents I had known. They looked older, smaller. My father's shoulders were hunched, his suit threadbare. My mother's face was lined, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow. I noticed the details instantly. The missing wedding ring from her finger, the absent heirloom watch from his wrist. They had pawned them. "Samantha," my mother said softly, her voice trembling. She took a step forward, but I instinctively stepped back. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "The restraining order is still valid." "We know," my father said, his voice low, "but we needed to talk." "Go through my lawyer," I replied. "We can't afford one," he whispered, the words barely audible. "We've lost everything." And then it poured out: the apartment they had rented after the eviction, too expensive. The car breaking down. Their savings gone. Thomas refusing to let them stay, his marriage unraveling with Lucy. Now they were living in a cheap motel, scraping enough for maybe one more week. Tears welled in my mother's eyes. "Samantha, I know you'll help. You've always been a good girl, so caring. You've always looked out for us." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Always forgotten, though," I said quietly. "Can't we just put the past behind us?" she pleaded. "We're your parents." I looked out the lobby window. The autumn sunlight painted the street, gold leaves drifting in the wind. For a moment, temptation whispered. It would be easy, so easy, to open my wallet again to fix their problems, like I always had, to slide back into the old role of invisible provider. But then I remembered Hillary's voice. "Take care of yourself. If they won't treat you like family, you have no obligation to treat them like family either." "I can't help you," I said finally. The words were small but heavy, carrying the weight of years of silence. My father's face twisted with desperation. "But I'm not your bank." I cut him off. My voice sharpened, my resolve hardening. "I'm not your parent. And just like Thomas said, I'm not your family, so I don't owe you family duties." My mother began to sob. "We were wrong. Please, just one more chance." "There are no more chances," I said. "I'm done." I turned and walked toward the elevator. My heart ached, but there was relief in every step. Behind me, my father's voice cracked one last time. "At least let us stay one night." I didn't answer. The elevator doors slid shut, muffling the sound of my mother's cries. Tears burned my own eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from the relief of finally choosing myself. That night, I called Aunt Hillary. My voice trembled as I told her what had happened. She listened quietly, then said softly, "That must have been such a hard decision." "It was," I admitted, "but I think it was the right one. It's time I start living my own life." "You're absolutely right," she said. "Your life belongs to you." Her words settled into me like a blessing. It was a month after that encounter in my office lobby when the message came. It wasn't from my parents. It was from Lucy, my brother's wife. My chest tightened as I read her name flash across my screen. For a moment I hesitated, unsure if I should even open it. But curiosity got the better of me. "I've decided to leave Thomas," she wrote. "I've started divorce proceedings. After seeing how he treated you and watching how he handled things when your parents were in trouble, I finally saw who he really was." I stared at the words, stunned. A flood of emotions crashed into me. Relief, sadness, even a strange sympathy. Lucy had never been cruel to me, but she had stood silently beside Thomas as he delivered his verdict. Take the hint. We don't want you. She had chosen his side then, and now she was walking away from him. That must be so hard, I typed back, surprising myself with the softness of my tone. Her reply came quickly. He's changed completely. Ever since I brought up divorce, he's been spiraling. He stopped going to work. He drinks too much. He got fired last week. I read her words slowly, letting them sink in. Thomas, the brother I had once admired as a child, the boy who used to chase me through the garden in the summers, the man who had become a stranger, was falling apart. Lucy continued. We were wrong about the wedding, about cutting you out. I followed Thomas, but it was a mistake. I see that now. I put the phone down and sat in silence. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt a hollow emptiness. This wasn't victory, it was loss, a loss that echoed through me like a dull ache because even in his downfall, Thomas was still my brother. And no matter how cruel he had been, a small part of me still grieved for the boy he used to be. Later that evening, I walked past Thomas's apartment. The windows were dark, the mailbox overflowing. I paused at the entrance, my heart thudding. For a moment, I wondered if I should knock, if I should try just once to reach out. But then I remembered his face, his voice as he told me I wasn't wanted, and I kept walking. His pain wasn't mine to carry anymore. As autumn deepened, the consequences of their choices began to unfold like a tragic play. My parents, stripped of the cottage, drifted between temporary rentals and motels. Word spread through distant relatives, whispers of their hardships circulating in hushed tones. Once proud, they were now pitied. And Thomas, without Lucy to hold him steady, fell further into the spiral. It wasn't revenge, it was inevitability. Every action has a consequence, and theirs had finally arrived. Meanwhile, my own life moved forward. At the digital marketing firm, I was promoted to vice president. For the first time, I had a team of my own colleagues who looked at me with respect rather than dismissal. The energy I had once poured into chasing my family's approval, I now poured into my work, my passions, and myself. Aunt Hillary remained my anchor. Every Sunday she called. Sometimes she came over, her laughter filling the quiet corners of my condo. It's beautiful to watch your life bloom, she told me once, her eyes shining with pride. And in her presence, I felt what family was supposed to feel like: warmth, respect, love without conditions. But the past didn't disappear so easily. In December, as snow dusted the city streets, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, my father's. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was his fourth letter in 3 months. The first had been desperate pleading, the second full of apologies, the third tinged with reflection. But this one was different. He wrote about their new life in a small apartment, about how he had taken a part-time job at a hardware store, how my mother had begun working at a senior care facility. He wrote about therapy sessions they had started, about the slow, painful process of facing their mistakes. I no longer beg for forgiveness, he wrote. I only want you to know that I see now. I see how wrong it was to push you aside, how blind we were to your worth. If therapy has taught me anything, it's that silence is also cruelty, and my silence hurt you most of all. For that, I will always be sorry. I set the letter down on my lap and stared out the window at the city glowing under a soft layer of snow. My chest ached, but it wasn't the sharp pain of betrayal anymore. It was something quieter, sadness maybe, or the weight of understanding that sometimes people only change when they lose everything. That night, Aunt Hillary called. Her voice was gentle, cautious. Your father phoned me yesterday, she said. He's changing Samantha. I truly believe that. I closed my eyes. I believe it too, but it's still too soon for reconciliation. Of course, she replied. Everything has its season. Right now, this is your season. You get to decide whether they have a place in your life again. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. I stood by the window watching the city lights blur into the falling snow. A year ago, I would have given anything to be accepted by my family. I tied my worth to their approval, bending myself into shapes that never fit, desperate to be wanted. But now I saw things differently. My value wasn't theirs to grant or withhold. It was mine. It had always been mine. For the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of peace. Not the peace my mother had claimed they were protecting by cutting me out, but the peace of finally knowing who I was and no longer needing their permission to exist. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a sense of renewal I had never felt before. Each morning as sunlight streamed through my windows, I reminded myself this is my life. No more bending, no more begging, no more waiting for a family that never wanted me. It still hurts sometimes. Healing doesn't erase pain, it only teaches you how to carry it differently. There were nights I dreamed of Thomas, of us as children, running through the fields behind the cottage, our laughter echoing in the summer air. I'd wake with tears on my cheeks, mourning not just what had been done to me, but what could never be again. Grief for a brother I had lost long before the wedding, grief for parents who never learned how to love me right. But alongside the grief came something else: strength. A strength born not from never being broken, but from being broken and standing back up anyway. I threw myself into my work mentoring younger women at the firm, teaching them not just strategies, but self-worth. Never let anyone make you feel small, I told them, my voice steady. Even if it's your own family. Especially if it's your own family. Their eyes lit with understanding, and in their gratitude I found healing. Aunt Hillary became more than just an aunt. She became my chosen family. We spent holidays together, cooking simple meals, laughing over wine. On my birthday, she surprised me with a small cake, candles flickering, her voice loud and proud as she sang. I cried that night not because of sadness, but because for the first time in years, I felt celebrated, seen, loved. My parents continued writing letters. Some were filled with apologies, some with memories, some with pleas for reconciliation. I read each one carefully, holding them like fragile things, but I never replied. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you rush into. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that the door must stay closed. And Thomas, I never heard from him again. Word reached me that he had moved out of state, drifting from job to job, a man without roots. I stopped asking questions after that. His choices were his, and I had my own life to live. It would be easy to say this was a story of revenge, that evicting my parents and watching my brother's life crumble was justice served. But that's not what this is. This is a story about self-respect, about learning that blood alone doesn't define family, about realizing that love without respect is not love at all, it's control. If there is one thing my story has taught me, it's this. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to choose yourself, even if it means standing alone. Because standing alone in truth is far better than being surrounded by people who build their happiness on your silence. I used to think family was everything, that without their approval I was nothing. But now I know better. Family is not about who shares your name. It's about who shows up for you, who protects you, who loves you without conditions. And sometimes the people who do that aren't the ones you were born to. Sometimes they're the ones you choose along the way. So here I am, 33 years old, standing in my own home, living my own life, and finally free. The scars are there, yes, but they remind me not of weakness, but of survival. And survival, I've learned, is its own kind of triumph. To anyone listening who has ever been excluded, betrayed, or silenced by the very people meant to love you, know this: you are not alone. You are not worthless. And you are not doomed to carry their cruelty forever. You have the power to break the cycle, to build your own life, to write your own story. I thought being left out of my brother's wedding was the end of my world, but in truth, it was the beginning of my freedom. And if my story resonates with you, if you felt the sting of betrayal or the ache of being unwanted, I hope you'll stay connected here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe if you want more stories like mine, and leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me how you've survived. Because in sharing, we remind each other that we are stronger than the pain that tried to break us. At the end of the day, I don't regret what I lost. I only honor what I found myself.